Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. Today I'm joined with the founder of Podmatch, Alex Sanfilippo. Alex, thanks for joining me today.
Dan, it's an honor to be here, man. I've been listening to your podcast for a while and really have enjoyed just what you put out into the world. So really, it truly is an honor to be here with you today, man. So thankful.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Before we get started, though, just introduce yourself to the listeners. Who is Alex today?
Yeah. So first off, as you mentioned, I'm the founder of a company called Podmatch, which is a service that connects podcast guests and hosts together for interviews. I always say, to keep it real brief here, it works like a dating app, but instead of connecting for dates, it connects you for podcast interviews. And so what I do is podcasting 100%. So who Alex is not necessarily defined by the work that I do, but that is a very important piece of what a lot of my time goes into. Beyond that, what's really important to me is first and foremost my faith in Jesus. Beyond that, it's my relationships with my wife, my friends, the people that are in my circle. I just really intend to always live life at the fullest and to make sure that it is a life full of serving others before serving myself, because I find a lot more fulfillment in that. So to kind of keep it high level there, that's a little bit about me.
And I love that, and I think that's one of the things that probably adds to your success. I've been on Podmatch now for a little over a year. I love the platform, but from day one, I could tell that you guys were more about service than you were about profit, so to speak. I think the first, I don't even remember what it was now. I don't even want to call it an issue, but the question I had, I shot an email out and got a response in like record time when it comes to customer service in today's day and age. It was actually from your wife, Alicia, and she answered the question quickly and promptly. And you could almost, in the email, you could almost hear the empathy as well, of her addressing what I was. And again, I don't even remember what it was anymore, but I just remember it was a great experience. So I guess that's good when you don't even remember what
Yeah.
the quote unquote problem is, but you remember that it was solved very efficiently. So again, kudos
Yeah. Thank you.
to you guys and the culture that you're creating there. And obviously, we're going to talk a lot about podcasting in general, just because it's an amazing platform, and you can certainly shed a lot of light on that. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about your journey as to how you got to where you are today, with Podmatch, because obviously, in the the world of tech, it's a relatively new platform. So, where was Alex at prior to that, and what kind of led you to Podmatch, and then some of the other stuff that you're doing as well?
Yeah, so I actually have a 15-year background in big corporate, I'll call it. So corporate America is kind of my background. I did 15 years in the aerospace industry. And Dan, I think you know this about me, but I'm going to say it for everybody else here too. Before anyone gets excited here, they're like, "Ooh, cool! I wasn't an astronaut, I wasn't a skydiver, and I wasn't a fighter pilot." Just so everybody knows, right? So all the fun stuff, Dan, is just off the table. I did enjoy what I did. I was working behind a computer a lot of that time in commercial operations is where I really landed. So it was basically just keeping profit margins healthy and processes smooth and systemized. And that was really what I spent my time doing. So I worked my way, it was 15 years. So like to keep that really brief, the last few years of I worked my way up to the C-suite level, and it was a big publicly traded company. It was fun. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But weirdly enough, I never I don't even know how to say it, but I kind of felt like there was just something missing, for lack of a better term, right? Like I couldn't put my finger on it. I just knew like, okay, I'm here, I'm enjoying this. Like it really was never a burden of a job. Again, leaving was actually like bittersweet for me. It was tough to make that decision because I enjoyed it, but something was like kind of always missing. And it, I'll never forget it. One day, this was shortly after we went public. I walked down to my CEO's office, who I reported directly to, because we had just saved so much money in one of our divisions. It was like a full 10%. And this company that we're part of, I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar organization. So like it was a lot. It was a lot. And I was like super proud. So I walked down to his office and I knocked on the door, sat down, and I just asked him, like, "Hey, did you see the report on this?" And I could hear in his voice, he's like, "Yeah, I saw it." And I could tell he wasn't happy about it. So like I kind of leaned in because I'm like, okay, something's wrong here, right? I was like, "You saw we saved 10% there. Like we didn't go over budget, like nothing like that." He's like, "No, I saw it." And so I just kind of like put my hands in. I'm like, "What? What's wrong?" And he goes, "We didn't tell the shareholders we're going to do that." He's like, "They're really furious because they could have been selling stocks at a higher amount. Like we just can't do stuff that's like like that anymore. And I can't remember exactly how he worded it, but I remember walking out of his office and realizing that that was kind of the end for me. That was like the beginning of the end. Like I couldn't even be creative anymore. I just couldn't challenge the status quo. I had to submit what I wanted to do for the next 6 months, and that was going to be it. And again, nothing against it. That was the goal of that company. It is of most big corporate companies, right? Like we achieved the goal we set after. I just realized my time there was nearing its end. And an important distinction here is that my last day there was one of my best days there, right? My last year there was one of my best years there because I believe the way you start one season is the way you end the last one. So you end on the same foot you begin on. And so I wanted to make sure I really ended strong. But at that point, I started really like thinking about like what's next for me. And that's kind of like what started the whole thing in motion. That's where I found podcasting, Dan. And that's where I started getting into it just as a show host. But I don't know if I made any gaps there. Is there anything I need to clarify on that, or do you think that makes sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. One thing I just want to kind of go back to is, when you mentioned about, you loved what you did, but yet it felt like you were unfulfilled. And I can relate to that completely because a lot of times when I'm telling people about, our RV journey and my wife and I selling our house and all of our stuff, like I clarify right out of the gate. I'm like, and look, you got to understand, like I wasn't in like a dead end 9 to 5 job that I hated. Like I absolutely loved what I did. I was working for an organization that I had founded and I had been part of for 30 years of my life, which at that point was 60% of my time on earth. So it
Right.
was bittersweet. So I can definitely relate to, kind of listening to that voice saying, look, your time here is done. It's time to close this chapter and open a new one. And I think that's one of the things. I mean, with that experience, that um, you know, kind of having that taste of you going in thinking this was great news, and him kind of being, you know, I don't know if upset's the right word, but just not as excited as you because it wasn't something. Because he's still beholden to the shareholders. Is that one of the things that when you started Podmatch, you wanted to really put service above the bottom line, people over profit, I guess. Was that part of what drove that philosophy to what you're doing now?
Definitely had something to do with it for sure. The aerospace industry as a whole, I mean, there's a lot of money in that industry. I mean, think about how much these airplanes cost that many of us fly on. Dan, I know you drive. Most of us fly, right? So, but they're extremely expensive. There's a lot of dollars in it, and it's a very cutthroat industry. So, the person sitting next to you, if you're in sales, is your friend, but they're also your competitor at times, right? And so, like, it's just highly competitive. And I'll never forget it, man. When I got into podcasting just as a host, and the reason I got in is because I was still at that job, but I wanted to learn how to become an entrepreneur. So I thought it would be really smart for me to like talk to people and figure out how they left a 9 to 5 job, right? So I could start to learn that for myself. But I immediately realized that the people that made up the podcasting industry, the service providers, the other podcasters, even the people that were being guests, they all had this abundance mindset. And man, I was like so drawn to that because I was used to competition, right? I'm like, all right, I'm starting basically an entrepreneurship podcast, which means I got 10,000 competitors now, right? No, like I had the wrong mindset. And as soon as I got into it, I realized, oh, these people all want to collaborate. They all want to help. They want to see what we can do together. And man, that really just reignited a passion that I believe comes from my faith and my upbringing as well of being a person of service, right? To really serving people. And I always like to say it this way: seek to be a person of value, not a person of profit. I find when you add value to people's lives, profit does follow. And I was reignited to that. So I fell in love with podcasting. So to long-windedly answer your question, absolutely that is at the core of everything we do with Podmatch.
Yeah. And I love that. That's something that I brought up. Anytime I'm interviewing, someone who's a host of another show, like this comes up, is just, how the podcasting community is uplifting. It's about uplifting everyone. You can have a show that is talking about the exact same thing that I'm talking about, and we're not in competition. It's like at the end of the show, you're like, hey, by the way, you should reach out to this person to be on your show because they would be a perfect fit. I just interviewed them 3 weeks ago, and if you want me to, I'll do an intro email for you to open that door. And that's happened so many times, and it's one of the things that I love about this is just, again, that collaborative attitude, that lifting up, because it's so different. Um, than anything else that we experience throughout our life. Like you said, normally it's all about competition. It's about the race to the top, especially coming from the aerospace industry. Like you
Yeah.
said, man, it's cutthroat. So, you touched on a little bit. I mean, but again, how much did that, you said it refreshed you. How much did it surprise you to, to see that? And it might have been like, did it take you a while? Like you hit one person who had that collaborative mindset, and you're like, okay, well, that's one person, but then it kept happening over and over. So like, at what point did you just say, well, this is it, this is the way it is, or were you still skeptical? How long were you skeptical?
I like to pretend like I wasn't at all, but let's put it this way. The first person who said something nice, I kind of like was like, really? You want to help me? I'm like, what do you actually want?
Yeah,
And the
what's in it for you?
next person did the same thing. I'm like, do you know Dan? You sound a lot like Dan, right? So, and eventually I just realized like, I, I was like, okay, wait, I'm the one who's different here in a bad way, right? And so I just really opened up to it. And again, I'm very, very thankful for that. So I wouldn't say it took me too long, but maybe a couple months of like just kind of hearing people and then realizing I could ask a question to people and it'd get answered because I knew nothing and like at all. So I didn't come into this being like, okay, I'm the next guy taking over. No, I was really beginner. Didn't know a thing about what I was doing. But yeah, as soon as I started getting comfortable asking questions, realizing, oh shoot, these people are here to help, I started looking for my area to start helping in as well. Like I started searching for that. And eventually that's what led to Podmatch getting launched, was the fact that I wasn't just like, help me, help me, help me. I was like, how can I help? I don't know much, but I at least know what microphone to buy now, right? Like, can I help someone with that? And so I really embraced it. And I'd say really it probably took 2 to 3 months for me to really get into that.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, I mean, I've actually been podcasting since 2012. Prior to this show, I hosted a show for our organization, and the difference there is that all I did there is conduct the interview. I'd go in; it was all face-to-face interviews. I went into a studio. It was a different format. It was usually about a 10 to 12 minute interview. We did it with our alumni sponsors. We promote events that were coming up, stuff like that. But I would walk in, do the interview. I'd actually do like 4 interviews in a row, so I'd be in there for an hour and a half or so. Leave and get links the next couple of weeks. Like, okay, this one's ready. Launch it. We'd send out a mass email. Um, but I really loved the storytelling aspect of it. So when we were got this crazy idea that we were going to literally go on a journey, I went to my producer at the time, and I was like, Tony, I want to continue to podcast. I want to tell the stories of the people we meet, and I think everybody's got an interesting story, and I think people can be inspired by all of them. So I definitely want to continue to podcast, um, but I don't know what happens after you hit stop. You know, so
Right.
and again, her realizing that she was quote unquote losing a client, so to speak. There was no hesitation in her wanting to help and show me the ropes. And she did actually produce my first probably 8 or 10 episodes of this show. And then a mutual friend of ours, Justin Shank, who has a huge podcast. I reached out to him as well. And between Tony and Justin, like they really showed me the back end of what actually has to happen to get it out onto the internet, because I was completely ignorant to all that. I just sat down in front of a microphone, had the conversation, and walked out of the room. But like, so right off the bat, when I kind of really took a different direction in podcasting, immediately there were people there to help, people there to lift me up. And again, when I went to Justin, it wasn't like, oh, this might take listeners away from the Growth Now movement podcast. No, it was like, yeah, this is how you do it. Use this service, yada, yada, yada. And it was like, boom, here we go. So it is completely refreshing to be in that space. And it's one of the reasons why I love it. And I love connecting with other hosts. I love having hosts on the show and, just pushing that forward. So, outside of what you do with Podmatch, you also run some events and stuff like that, which again is to just help lift others up. I mean, at, as if Podmatch wasn't enough, you wanted to now do more and create these events and bring in people who, again, yeah, it's kind of like, even if you didn't know the answer, you knew someone who would have that answer. So you wanted to expose that person to your network to help lift them up. I mean, again, why bother? Why do that?
I mean, it's exactly what you just said, Dan. That's very insightful. So as soon as we launched Podmatch, right? Like like I take the leap of getting out of corporate and becoming a full-time entrepreneur, startup founder, right? I decided to do that. Actually, real quick, I got to shout out one of your former episodes. I actually listened to Journey My Mother's Son podcast. Like I'm a listener as well. And you had an episode with a guy named Jason Curtis, and it was titled Taking the Leap. That was on September 15th, 2023. I encourage you to go back and listen to that because it was just a great story of Jason being like, I wasn't a writer, but I wanted to be. I was in the military, but I didn't want to be, right? Like making all these shifts in his life. I can't even like give you one quote from it, but basically him just being like, I just kept on trying things. I kept on being relentless. I kept on moving forward. And I think that's what it took for me as well to make that leap from corporate to ultimately becoming a startup software founder, entrepreneur, right? But as soon as I did that, I realized, hey, we're delivering a ton of value, which I've received from so many of these people in podcasting. But there's a lot of questions coming through. And that was one of the things I realized. I'm like, man, and these are questions that I'm like, well, I don't know, right? I don't have, I don't know, 15 years experience in podcasting like Dan does, right? So I'm like, I don't know the answer to that, right? And so what I decided to do was decide to put together an event because we're like, hey, a fun way for us to still be a community and learn together would be an event versus me just being like, here, read this blog post, here, go watch this video, which sometimes that does make the most sense depending on where someone's at in their journey. But for a lot of us, I'm like, man, can we bring people together to learn to elevate each other as well, right? So I love the quote that says, a rising tide lifts all ships. That's the whole concept behind this quarterly event that we do. It's, hey, we're all going to be going on this journey together. And yeah, so the software is great. I really love educating people. Like as I continue to learn and grow in this space, I'm becoming more and more passionate about actually being somebody to help serve and support podcasters. And I'm not saying I'm becoming a podcast coach. There's no way anyone can pay me for my time. Like I have set that up intentionally, right? But I do want to help and serve and support because someone did that for me when I started. I want to make sure I continue to pay it forward. So I'm glad you brought the events. That's been absolutely a blast. We love doing that. And the value it adds is just, I mean, even for me, I learned so much from those things. It's incredible.
Yeah. And I love, when you talked about that episode I did with Jason Curtis and, taking the leap, like there are so many lessons in that because I think so many times, we can talk ourselves out of anything. Like there's a million reasons why not to do anything. I mean, there are a million reasons why my wife and I shouldn't have sold our house. There are a million reasons why you could have stayed in, a secure corporate aerospace industry, but sooner at one point, you just got to be like, you know what? No, we're going to take that leap. We're going to, and sometimes, those leaps are different for all of us, but a lot of times, like, you're kind of taking that step down and you're not sure if it's a 6-inch drop or if it's a 6-foot drop. Because you can see a little bit of that first step, but you're kind of like, okay, where does my foot going to land? And sometimes we're going to fall, and that's okay. As long as we take that leap and we get back up and we take the next step as well. So, as you were going back and forth, about wanting to, kind of take that next step. I mean, what was that internal battle like for you? Because again, you knew your time was up, but yet there's always this internal battle. And just walk me through how that was for you personally.
Well, Dan, the scariest part was actually talking to my wife, having that
I've been
conversation,
there.
which you've been there, right? Yeah. I should have called you first. I didn't know you yet, but I probably needed like a pep talk. That was the probably the second most nervous I've ever been in my life. Number one would be asking her to marry me. And the second time was telling her I want to quit my job. And at that point, she had sold a business just 6 months before then. So we did have cash, which was nice, but we were a one-income family at that point, right? So it was one of those things where I was like, how do I say I want to leave my job? So I said it in such a beautiful, elegant way. I said, I think I want to leave my job. And she goes, what? And anyway, here's the thing. I was like sweating having this conversation. And she just paused for a second. She goes, no, that makes sense. I think that's a good idea, right? I think that makes sense. It's time to do that. And so that support really, really just amped me up for it. Now, I should give this disclaimer. This wasn't like a one and done situation where I'm like, I'm leaving, I'm starting Podmatch. No, that wasn't the order of it. It was, I'm leaving. It was 2 years of failed side hustles, right? And then podcasting ended up being one of the things that actually made it. And then that ultimately led me to launching Podmatch while I was still at that job. So I really believe in taking a calculated risk So when I talked to my wife, I had the numbers ready, right? So basically I was able to show like, hey, and to your point, Dan, this is a 6-inch drop or a 6-foot drop, but it's not a 60-foot drop, right? Like we're not going to jump off a mountain and kill ourselves by mistake, right? Like we can see that, okay, this might hurt or it might be kind of a soft landing. We're not sure, but a calculated risk. So basically I said, here's how much money we have. If we live off of this much per month and we don't get an income for 2 years, we'll still have X in the bank account, which isn't very much, but we'll be able to hopefully by that time close to replace our current income so we can change our lifestyle to be a little bit more. We can actually go out with friends and eat and stuff like that, right? And if we get a flat tire, we can change it, that type of thing. So calculated risk. And at the end of the day, what I call it is it's sacrificing the sake of the good for the potential great. There's no guarantee, but it's the sake of the like it's the potential great. You're giving up the good for it. And I think that that's just the thing that's what makes a leap worthwhile is saying, hey, this will put me in a better space potentially, right? It might get me there. And then again, doing the calculating. And Dan, to kind of bring this whole thing full circle here, the one thing I was missing for the longest was what I did when I talked to Alicia, which was to take courage. And courage simply means being afraid than doing what you have to do anyway. For a long time, I knew I needed to go ahead and just drop the corporate job and go full-time with Podmatch, but I couldn't bring myself to do it because of the comfort, flexibility, all the things, right? Like vacation time, what's that? I had all those things, but at the end of the day, what I had to do, what I was missing was taking courage. Again, being afraid, but saying, you know what? It's potentially great. I'm going to go ahead and just take this risk and take courage and step into it. And at the end of the day, that's what I really had to develop during that time. And I'd say for me, that was about a 6-month period in my life. And man, that grew me as a person so much in that 6 months.
Yeah. And again, having the support of your wife, I'm sure, is a huge asset for sure. That no matter what we do, anyone who says like they're a self-made success, like that's just not true. Like there's someone else there in the background. Maybe it's one person, maybe it's a team of people, but there's always someone else there. So, I hate that term of, this person's a self-made millionaire, this person's a self-made this or self-made that, because it's just so untrue. There's nothing
right.
true about that statement. We all, have someone there supporting us. And I loved what you talked about, as far as, um, you know, payback time and stuff like that. I mean, that's one of the things my mom had always talked about throughout her life. When she'd go out and volunteer with the Salvation Army for hurricane relief, or when she went up to Ground Zero after 9/11, I'd asked her at one point, why do you constantly, want to go back and give back like that? She's like, there's been many of people that have helped me throughout my life, so for me, this is just payback time. Maybe I can't pay them back, directly, but I can pay other people forward, because of what someone else did for me.
So
I love
wise,
that.
man.
Yeah, I love that. Um, so going from, podcast host and kind of, working your way through that, again, with no experience and just kind of, figuring it out and making mistakes and learning from those mistakes and, continuing to move forward. At what point then in that journey did you feel like, wow, there's a need for, again, this dating app, for podcasters and guests and hosts and all that sort of stuff. Like how did that idea actually come to fruition throughout this period?
Yeah, so it was very intentional. And if I can summarize in my former podcast, now I have a podcast called Podcasting Made Simple, but the first 158 episodes on that podcast are creating a brand. And that's the podcast I started. And the whole idea was the art of creating a brand. So I was interviewing entrepreneurs who had successfully left a 9-to-5 job to become a full-time entrepreneur. And so what I was looking for is like, how do you do this? Right. And I'm going to way oversimplify it, Dan. I don't mean to any disrespect to the 100 and some odd people that gave me like their time and had all these like really detailed ways of doing it. But to really simplify what I learned, there's 4 steps. And this is what I applied to create Podmatch. Step 1 is find an area of passion. For me, podcasting, it became the area of passion. Get into the community. So at that point, I was not only a podcaster, but also helping other people, even if it was on a small level. I was also speaking and traveling to go to all the events and stuff like that. So again, it's find the passion, get in the community. The third thing is to find a simple problem that community is struggling with. And the last thing is to offer a solution as fast as you can to that problem. So I'll never forget, I was actually in Orlando, Florida in March 2020, just before the world shut down. There's about 2,000 people in a room together. No problem there, right? And I got off stage after I finished speaking with an intent of anyone who talks to me, I'm going to ask them what they're struggling with. Again, that was my area of passion. That was my community. I wanted to find out what the problem was. And I heard a lot of things, but I wrote down 100 times almost the exact same thing, which was, Alex, I'm having trouble finding my next guest. Alex, I'm having trouble finding ideal guest. Alex, I don't know where to get a guest. And it just kept on coming up. And yes, I heard a lot of different things, but that was the one common trend. So when I came home, I said, how do we help these podcasters find guests, right? Because Dan, you and I can only say yes so many times, right? So there was 100 right there. That already filled up my next 2 years at my pace. And I was like, okay, there's got to be a way here. So I just whiteboarded out, and I was like, it took me a little bit. I honestly feel like God put the idea on my heart. Like I just felt like, oh man, an industry that does this well is the dating app industry. Now I'll be real, I've been married too long to ever use a dating app. So I just have heard that they work well, but I don't know how they work. But at that point I was like, man, what if we built something just like that? But instead of dates, it's podcast guests and hosts together for interviews, right? Based off of what they're interested in, talking about uh, living remotely or baseball, right? In your case, Dan, and having somebody who's saying, I want someone who has a former baseball player, coach type of thing, right? You can find those people. And that was the idea. And what we did is I had the idea on March 10th, 2020. And on June 15th, 2020, launched into an early beta. We did it as fast as we could. No logo, no nothing, just asked, hey, 100 people who told me you're struggling with this, did this work for you? Yes or no? And we heard yes. And we just kept on following that after that. But that is how the whole thing became a product.
Love that. And it is, and again, I know you're not a self promoter, so I'll do this for you because it is an amazing app. I think before we started recording, I'd mentioned that this is my 114th or 115th interview, strictly through the app.
It's amazing,
And
man.
for me, it's really just opened so many more doors because the whole objective of my podcast initially was to kind of tell the stories of the people that we've met in our travels, which I still do. I don't get every single guest through Podmatch. I get a lot of them through there, but there's still a lot of people that I meet. But it really allowed me to kind of take my show to the next level and just broaden. Like you mentioned Jason Curtis. Like I wasn't gonna just swing by Jason Curtis in the UK and bump
Right.
into him in a campground, but through your platform, I was able to. I've had several guests or people who have been on their show, where we met through Podmatch, done the interview, and then I'm going through their area, and we get together and have a cup of coffee. I don't drink coffee, but they'll drink coffee and I'll drink a water or something. And that is so cool to be able to connect. And you and I are going to do that at some point when we're traveling through your area. So that, but it's really just for me again. It's just allowed me to really take it to the next level, and be able to tell those stories of people. And
Yeah.
again, I've got such a broad range of guests. Like I've had some people tell me, your show needs to have more of a niche. It should be either just baseball or just sports or just people RVing. And it's like, no, that's not what it's about. It's just about people. It's about many little people in many little places telling their stories. So whether it's a podcast host or a former athlete or someone who started a gym in the UK, like those are stories that can inspire other people. So you don't have to listen to every episode. If there's one that you don't think will interest you, that's fine. But there's probably something there that is because it's pretty broad, and for me, like I do it because I want to have those conversations first and foremost. Like I want to learn from you. I want to learn from my guests. I want to, figure out what drove you to get where you were. And, all the listeners that benefit, that's just icing on the cake for me, But first and foremost, I am intrigued to have these conversations. The many little people that we come across, whether it's virtually or face to face. So I thank you for allowing me to take this show to another level. And I'm sure all those out there on the platform, I'm speaking for them as well. Now, another thing that, again, just proves the point of the fact that you are people over profit. I mean, when I first came onto the platform, it was either right after or right before you did a purge of the platform. And, again, in a society where it's all about the numbers, you took a step back and said, no, some of these aren't the right fit. Again, gutsy step. Could have been a 6-inch step. Could have been a 6-foot fall. What drove that, and how do you feel, about that decision today?
Yeah. So that one might have been a 60-foot drop. I don't know. It was the right decision through and through. But what I realized is, so I was new to software when we made that decision. I was still only at that point, maybe a year and a half into my journey. And I realized that there was a lot of inactive people on the platform, which if you go to any social media platform, really any software platform, there's mostly inactive people. That's just kind of how it works. And the thing is, everyone talks about, oh, at some point you're going to want to exit. And that's never been on my mind. I do this because, like, the same you're talking about with your podcast, by the way, it's fulfilling for you. And that's always my first question, people, is what you're doing fulfilling? If not, why are you doing it? Right. And so for me, this is fulfilling for me. That's why I'm happy to be doing this whole pod match thing. And I was like, man, I'm not interested in the exit. People are like, you need bigger numbers. Like, you always need to be getting bigger numbers. Don't do anything to make those look like they're smaller, right? That's a problem if you do that. And I just didn't subscribe to that notion. I was like, man, but that's not good for the people who are actually using the platform. What I don't want to have happen is you message 10 people on the platform and not one gets back to you because they're all inactive. And so we decided to do, yeah, we took those people were paying subscriptions, but they weren't using the platform. And so we didn't just like remove people. We asked them like, hey, notice you're not using this. Can we just cut your account off? And most of them are like, oh, yes, please. I actually forgot, right? Like I stopped my podcast, or I no longer want to be a guest anymore. I'm doing a new job. There was so many reasons. And yeah, we decided to purge. And it was actually, I can't remember the exact percentage, but I believe it was just over 40% of our entire database we decided to remove. And we got nothing but great feedback from people, companies, and organizations. All were like, Alex, that was a terrible decision. Why would you do that? But at the end of the day, I slept really well knowing the people that I said I'm going to serve and help are very happy with this decision. And now every month, people don't realize it, but we do a purge every month automatically. And it's all automated. So they're automatically getting emails. Hey, we're going to remove your account if you don't do XYZ, right? We're going to stop you paying us, all that. And we made the decision because we know that serves the people who are actually using it better. And I think that although software is all about users, customers, and stuff like that, we call people members because we want to remember, hey, we're in a community with other human beings and we want to treat them with respect as a human being deserves. And that's why we've decided to run this company. And that's the direction we're going in moving forward as well.
Yeah. And, again, I mean, there's so much to look at there in that move alone. And I think, number one, you said those people, their credit card was still getting ticked every month, and one of the beauties of many subscription businesses is, people start those businesses knowing that there's going to be people who are going to sign up and not do whatever they're paying you to do, but continue to pay you, and that alone is amazing. So again, those people who did get purged were, like you said, grateful that, oh wow, that's X amount of dollars that I was spending and I didn't even realize I was spending it anymore. So thank you for doing that. And then from someone who's active on the platform, that is one of the most frustrating things out there is when you shoot one of those messages and you just don't get a reply. And I would much rather have someone just hit the pass button. That way I know where I stand and I can kind of move on than just kind of hanging out there. Like, okay, did the message go through? Like, what happened? What's going on? So that, for the active users, it's huge to keep the platform full of active members because that is so important. Um, to know that when you send a message to somebody, you are going to get a reply. And the other nice thing about the platform is you have a little note in there on people's profile page what their general response time is. So it's nice to know if you have somebody in there that's like responds in 6 days or something, you kind of know, okay, it'll be a week till I hear back from this person. So it gives you a little bit of a barometer as to what to expect. So again, I think that's a great feature as well. So, once you took the leap, you started the platform, um, you got great feedback. You're now, um, I forget, we talked about it before the show, but well over 10,000 members. Did you actually envision it to do what it's doing today when you first started? Like this was all part of the plan, or is there a little bit of surprise element in there?
A lot of surprise. My pride wants me to be like, we're on schedule, right? And coming from like a commercial operations background where I was really good at projections, I had no idea when I stepped into this. There was nothing to gauge it by. So it was just kind of like a shot in the dark. Again, for me, it started with a feeling like I'm supposed to do this. I'm called to do this, right? Which again drives back to my faith. But I just was like, okay, well, what makes some projections? And it's so funny you mentioned that, Dan, because what I wrote down on paper is not what I told my CPA. So the CPA is like, hey, I need you to give me like 3 years of forecasting. I'm like, I don't know. He's like, dude, you got to come up with something. And it was so funny because I'm not like one to drink too much, but we were out having drinks somewhere. And apparently I get a little bit overly ambitious if I have some drinks. So I don't even remember telling him certain numbers, but he wrote them down. And well, I got a really big tax return last year. Let's put it this way, because of how overly ambitious I was. Because I was paying tax on a number that I'm like, wait, this company would never be that big because the industry is not that big. And he's like, oh, well, why did you say that? I'm like, I don't know. You asked me when I started, right? So for me, it's one of those things where I'm like, I don't get too tied to an end result, but where I am today is more than I ever thought that we'd have from this. And I consider myself extremely blessed for that reason. And our goal is to give as much of that back as we possibly can while still keeping the lights on and stuff, right? But my wife and I are not like, you'll never see me driving a Ferrari, right? Like, I don't even know how else to say that, but I think everyone probably gets what I'm saying. I'm just not one of those typical founders that you're going to see living the most extravagant life ever. I prefer to keep things simple. So does my wife. We don't have big needs like that. So we just say, can we put this back in the hands of creators? And we work really hard to make sure that we can do that as well.
I love that. So just one other thing before we start to wrap things up. So let's just talk real quick about, how important, you've mentioned it several times throughout the conversation, about how important your faith is in all of this. Um, Talk to me a little bit about that. I mean, what role does, having that faith play in what you're doing?
And that's for me personally, that's everything. I mean, everything in my life is based on that foundation. So again, I believe in Jesus from the Bible. I'm never one to push that on people or anything like that. But man, I just remember my early 20s being a very different person than I am today. And that goes back quite a bit of time. I was born in 88, if anyone wants to do the math. And but at that point in my life, I was a very different person. But I'll never forget it. When I found Jesus, something changed inside me. And I don't even know how to really describe that other than the fact that I had a purpose. I had a peace. I felt like I actually had direction in my life, and I wanted to become a better person. Not because I needed to or was supposed to, but because I felt internally like, man, there's a better version of me in here that I know. I feel like I have a roadmap to get that out. And so for me, it's everything. So the entire company, like the way we manage it, the way we grow it, all those things are just so important to us. And that's why, like, if you look at our core values page or our about page, I guess is what they're on, we talk about human to human, which we already mentioned, right? Like treating people with love and respect because they deserve that, and also seeking to serve. And those to me are both principles that come from my faith that we've just done our best to keep that involved everywhere we possibly can in the company. And we've done really well. We've succeeded really well. And people are often like, Alex, how are you doing this all organically? Like, you don't do any paid ads. There's no like nothing crazy going on in the background. No, I just believe it's a blessing that comes to those who really do seek to serve other people and treat people like people, right? Believe it or not, people like to say nice things about you if you're nice to them. And so, yeah, my faith has driven all of that. And really, like, our entire business model is based upon that.
I love that. Alex, is there anything that we missed that you think would be valuable to the listeners before we wrap things up?
Man, the only thing I'll mention is our decision to give back through our Pod Value Initiative. I kind of hinted at it a minute ago, but didn't really mention it. So real briefly, we actually decided to cut our profits in half and give half of them back to podcast hosts that are creating episodes. And I want to make it very clear, no one is getting rich off of that. The end goal, which we're still working toward, is to help podcasters offset their production costs. Because as Dan mentioned, like, there's production that goes into it, right? There's work. And at the end of the day, I believe in independent voices getting heard and elevated. And I love your show because it does that. I would have never gotten to hear Jason Curtis. I know we're giving him a lot of credit here because we've talked about it a few times, but I'll never meet Jason Curtis. I would have never heard him if it weren't for Dan doing this. And so for us, we're like, can we help podcasters continue to get their voices elevated and heard? And I believe that podcasting is the best way in the world to make that happen. And I'd say that's the only gap we had here today, Dan, but hopefully that's valuable.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And again, like you said, it's not something that, somebody can quit their day job and just rely on what they're going to get on their Podmatch commissions, but it is definitely something that's nice. I mean, every time that I hit that threshold where I get the PayPal payment, like, it's like, cool, this was because of podcasting. So yeah, I think that's definitely something to be brought up for sure. Alex, how can people find you if they want to find out more? If there's somebody out there who's thinking of podcasting, if they're trying to figure out how to get guests, or they just want to reach out to you and learn more about you, how do they find you on the internet?
Yeah, podmatch.com has everything. You can find me there. You can see what we've got going on. If you go to the navigation, which we're literally in the process of changing right now, so hopefully by the time this is out, someone sees the new one, you can even find ways to contact me and stuff like that. I've made it really simple and very accessible. I don't have a team of 30 people that you have to get through. If you're going to email me, you're going to get me, you're going to get Alicia, my wife. So I'd love to hear from anybody. And of course, check out the website, see if it's helpful at all. And Dan, I appreciate you even giving me the opportunity, the platform. Absolutely love what you're doing here, man. You are a gift to the podcasting space. So I'm so thankful.
Thank you. I really appreciate that coming from you of all people, for sure, because you are an expert in the industry, without a doubt. So thank you very much for that. So that brings us to our final question. And again, you're a listener, so you know what it is, but I still kind of go through the whole thing again. As you know, the subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People in Many Little Places, which comes from the opening lyrics of the Michael Franti song Gloria, which go, when many little people in many little places do many little things and the whole world changes. What's one of the little things that Alex does on a daily basis to make the world a little bit better?
I'm going to share this from a twofold perspective, because first off, I think that we can't really make the world a better place without thinking of ourselves. And maybe that sounds a little selfish. We have to take care of us. And so the first thing I mention is that I make sure I journal every morning. And I find that to be very helpful. I get my thoughts out. I figure out where I want to go. I'm intentionally directing my life in the way that I want to go. And I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but a lot of that goes back to my faith, right? I'm in the Bible. I'm doing that stuff and I'm journaling. I'm learning. And when I feel like I'm full, like I know the direction, I'm able to serve other people. So the thing that I do after that is I seek to add value to one person every day. Seek to add value to one person every day. I believe it's a Helen Keller quote. She said, "Do for one what you wish you could do for all." And for me, I'm an ambitious guy. I'd love to help thousands of people, right? That'd be great. But at the end of the day, I know that if I can just focus on one, then hopefully they can help one who can help one who can help one, right? And that can continue moving. So for me, I have to always bring myself back to saying, okay, I'd love to help the masses. I'd love to change the world. But if I can change one life today, wouldn't that be worth it? And so that for me is how I show up, make the world a better place. I find that one person who typically is a podcaster in just where I'm at in my life right now, right? They can help take them a little bit further than where they are right now and to where they want to go. And that's how I really show up and make the world a better place every day.
I love that. And it's so important, what you said about, it sounds selfish, but at the end of the day, you can't fill from an empty cup. So you really do have to take care of yourself first, which is something that, quite frankly, took me years and years to learn, but it's true. You can't fill, someone else's cup with an empty cup. And, the other thing about just keeping it in perspective of knowing that even though you want to help thousands, just by helping one, that the ripple effect that is then caused by then, them going out and helping someone else, and then that person helping someone else, that you really are making a much larger impact than what you think. It goes so much further than that one person that you filled up that day. So to be able to keep that in perspective, I think is very important. So that's a great answer. Alex, I really appreciate the time. It's a great conversation. Probably could have gone on and on and on, but I do have to, hit the stop button at some point. So again, I really appreciate the time. For those out there listening, be sure to check out my other podcasts and blogs at journeymymotherson.com. While you're there, please pick up a copy of one of my books. I think you'll enjoy them. And again, Alex, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Dan, it was an honor to be here, and thank you everyone for listening.